In the book of John, it makes it clear that the Word of God is spiritual.
Yes.
And in 1 Corinthians 2, it also says that the natural mind doesn't receive the things of the Spirit.
Right.
So if you're speaking to an unbeliever, what is the dynamic that's going on? Because, you're always aware of the fact that they might not be kind of interested, or they may not be able to receive what you're saying, and it's hard to get the balance right.
Yes. Well, that's the mystery to me, particularly of preaching, of proclaiming. And really, like Tim Keller says, there's really three ministries of the Word. If you've read Tim's book on preaching, there's that informal ministry, like if you and I were sitting down over tea and we talked about, what do you think it means, what I mean? It's the ministry of the Word. There's a small group authorized teacher ministry of the Word. Tim Keller, this is a book on preaching. And then there's the proclamation of the Word in the church assembled in worship, where someone's set aside to proclaim it. Three ministries of the Word. What you're talking about is a challenge in every one of those. If I'm talking one-on-one, if I'm teaching a small group, if I'm authorized to stand and face the congregation as the preacher, I'm dealing with what is the Spirit going to do with this Word. And I fall back, you mentioned the Gospel of John. The Spirit is like the wind that blows where that wind will blow. And I can preach, but I have no control over the blowing of the wind. I can seek to make it clear, and that's what I try to do. By exposition, by illustration, telling stories about people with grains of rice and gold, by trying to throw it in their lap, put their ID on it. But what happens after that is the mystery of preaching. Now, you were kind to say I've been preaching 50 years. I'm actually in my 54th year right now. I need to update my bio. And let me tell you about that. There have been some times when I got it preached and it was so sorry. I was sick. I've preached with influenza. I've preached with fever. I've preached when I hardly knew what I was doing. I've preached when it was incoherent. And I've had somebody come out the door and say, "Pastor, that changed my life. We're going to sell the business and we're going to go to Zanzibar." I said, "What?" Really? And then there have been times when I've spent 30 hours on a sermon. I say, "Man, I nailed it this morning. The angels in heaven sang." And everybody knew that the sermon was as dead as a doornail. That's when people go out and say, "Sure had a good spirit today, didn't we?" Yeah, sure. You don't control that. And that'd be my word about what you said. Spiritual things spiritually discerned. That is out of my hands. Now, what I can do about it, and this is very real to me, is never believe that I've so mastered the mechanics of preaching that I get up and do it, and just because I've mastered the rhetoric, God has to work. There's a warning about that in that great story of Samson. You remember when he visited the barbershop? It said he wist not. I love that King James word. He wist not that what? The Spirit had departed. All those of us who preach need to live with a holy fear that we don't fall in love with the sound of our own voice, that we don't think, "I've done this 10,000 times, I know how to do it." We'll be just like Samson. Say, "I know how to slay Philistines," and go out and lose. So what I can answer to you there is that I don't control how the wind blows. I can pray for it, I can ask for it, but Jesus said the wind blows where it wishes, where it wills. Okay, yes.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
With your lyrical genius, how have you cultivated that over the years? How do you look for images? You're talking about images today.
Yeah.
How do you look for images, cultivate them, distill them into sentences and present them?
Well, let me talk about any gift, any spiritual gift, a gift of preaching. A gift is a gift is a gift. Not only whatever gift I may have, whatever gift anybody may have. No one has any more right to look at that as achievement than I would consider it to be an achievement that I've got black hair or gray hair, or brown eyes or blue eyes. That is not an achievement. So first of all, the preacher is always somebody who lives with a sense, I've nothing that I've not been given. And the Spirit sovereignly gives gift, but listen, a gift is a gift is a gift, period. Now, that varies with some people. In my own life, for whatever purposes, I have some level of aptitude of looking at a text and seeing the image in that text and trying to relate it to something that's an equivalent image now. But that is not a gift, that is a skill that can be honed and disciplined. Now it requires some things. First of all, it requires that you be an observer and a reader. If you want to preach, you must be an observer and a reader. And here's what I mean by observer. C.H. Spurgeon, out at his college, made a statement on a Friday when he would go out every Friday. World famous preacher, go out, had 400 students. Spurgeon made the statement one time, I could preach for a month and every illustration and every sermon would be from a candle burning. Students did as they would. Nah, you can't. He said, all right. So he wrote a book. You can still get the book called Sermons in Candles. Every illustration in a dozen sermons is from something about watching a candle burn. It's astonishment. So it was developing powers of observation. And, you do that, and you do that, all good things, every good and perfect gift comes down from a Father. You can do that by reading people who have great powers of observation. Say a short story writer, that's a great short story writer, helps develop your powers of observation. Read all kinds of literature to develop your own powers of description. It can be a discipline. But another thing is, write it down. The dullest pencil is better than the sharpest mind. Everyone who wants to be a preacher and use the illustrative material needs to keep a notebook of things that you have seen, and they are everywhere. They're in nature, they're in biography and autobiography, they're in fiction and nonfiction, they're in just sitting and watching people. Keep a notebook. And let me say this, God is on your side in that regard. Carl Jung, who was he was a theist of some kind. He wasn't an evangelical, but he was a theist. Over against Freud, who was an atheist. Jung was one of the founders of psychiatry. And he invented a principle called synchronicity, and that is things come together randomly with meaning. And you watch it. If you know that out here 6 weeks from now, you're going to be preaching on generosity and covetousness, God will put examples of those right square in front of you. He will. He will. I've lived it. I know it. If you know where you're going with your teaching and preaching and you keep a notebook, He'll hit you right in the forehead with stories, anecdotes, and things. Now, having said that, always let exposition dominate. You don't want to have skyscraper sermons. You know what a skyscraper sermon is? It's one story on top of another. That's high-rise sermons. You don't want that. Exposition needs to dominate. But stories can play a supporting role because Jesus told stories. We've been talking about it tonight. These are stories. It says the reign of God is like this. Let me give you a piece of practical advice for teaching and preaching. One a day. One a day. Just make it a discipline. One a day. I used to have to make myself do that. Now it's copious. It's more than that. But one a day. Something in an advertisement on the side of a coach, a snatch of conversation, something from the paper. If you just look at today's newspaper, I read it during breakfast, there is stuff for sermons on every page in terms of what it illustrates, what it sheds light on. Just find one a day, and here's the key. Attach that to a text and a topic. Attach it to a text and a topic. And keep that in a notebook. You'll be surprised. After several months of that, you'll have a cornucopia. You'll have a horn of plenty of stories. Ask of the story, attach it to a text and to a topic. Okay, does that help? Well, it's been good to talk with you this evening. By God's grace, we are to meet what time in the morning? At 10:30 in the morning. We're going to be doing something similar as far as we can get. Images in the book of Philippians, a different kind of biblical literature, looking for images around which you can gather your expository thoughts from Paul's letter to the Philippians.